Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Telegraph's associate political editor, Tony Diver, and the political journalist, Zoe Grünewald. Welcome and lovely to see both of you. So let's take a look at the front pages, starting with the Telegraph. It leads with the acquittal of a former British paratrooper accused of murdering two people on Bloody Sunday in 1972, which carries calls from the Shadow Justice Secretary to stop any more of what he calls show trials of veterans. Similar sentiments on the front page of the Daily Mail. Its headline, "Now End the Witch Hunt." According to The Guardian, the Chancellor is now discussing the possibility of raising income tax in the coming budget, despite an election manifesto pledge not to. With chaos reigning around who will chair the government's grooming gangs inquiry, The Times reports that it may now be called off until next year. The Financial Times says oil refineries in India and China are looking at curbing oil supplies to Russia in the wake of renewed sanctions from the US to try to get Russia to the peace table over Ukraine. News that Tess Daly and Claudia Winkleman are leaving BBC Strictly Come Dancing leads the Metro with the headline "Quit a Ball." The Express also picking up on that story with "We are strictly done dancing." The Sun claims the two women decided even they were going to leave a year ago. And The Star says Zoe Ball is being hotly tipped to be the show's new host. So let's get more than from our guest tonight. Welcome to both of you. And let's head to The Guardian first of all. Reeves discussing an increase to income tax. Zoe.
This is very interesting. And is likely to be a story that's going to get a lot of pickup. There's going to be a lot of questions for the Chancellor because, of course, it was in Labour's manifesto that they would not increase income tax. They would not increase national insurance and they wouldn't increase VAT. Now, they maintain that they haven't really increased national insurance, even though I think employers would argue that they have. But income tax is the big one because that is a tax on working. You know, it's a tax on what people are taking home in their pay packets. The Guardian is suggesting they're not quite sure what they might do to it. They might consider adding 1p to the basic rate, which I think would be quite difficult because obviously that's going to hit everybody who works. Or they might go for the higher or additional rates, which obviously would affect those who earn more, and that would sort of be broadly in line with this narrative that they're going to go for people with the broader shoulders. It is always difficult to talk about tax rises, especially if it comes alongside cuts. So, interesting. She's got to plug this black hole from somewhere. They say that if she made changes to the basic rate, that could bring in more than $8 billion, which is a substantial sum of money.
And yet, inflation is still 3.8%. People can't afford anything still, and you're going to raise money again from the Treasury. I've been saying for months they need to increase the threshold levels and then put up income tax. You take some of the, less well-off people, you protect them effectively. But how realistic is this, do you think? Because will she work out that nibbling around the edges and all the other little taxes simply won't raise enough money, do you think?
I think that's it. I mean, I think there's a consensus among Treasury officials and economists that if she's got to raise £30 billion, you can't do that just by fiddling around with the smaller taxes here and there, a bit of beer duty, fuel duty, perhaps, those smaller taxes, you can't make up that kind of money. And so they're going to have to go for one of the big ones. The problem, as Zoe says, is that they've already ruled out 3 of the big ones in their manifesto, so they're going to take a big political hit. I mean, there is another point here, which is, the Guardian's put at the end of this bit on the front, which is to say that the Chancellor wants to increase the amount of headroom that she's got at this budget. I mean, the public, on the whole, I would imagine, does not care one bit about how much fiscal headroom the Chancellor has got.
Except we know our debt is going up. And basically, you're raising taxes to pay the debt repayments. And this is the sort of ugly truth of it, isn't it? I mean, yeah, it's going to be extremely interesting. But the problem of doing this is the last shtick for a year and a half is, well, we can't break our manifesto. I'll club a business instead. And suddenly that is just not true anymore. So it's not just the manifesto promise. It's the last year and a half has just been a rubbish lie, effectively.
Well, I think we've seen an interesting change in rhetoric from the government over the last few weeks, which is to start blaming Brexit for the problems that they've got. And, of course, the government always blames external factors. Oh, it's the war in Ukraine, it's the war in Gaza, maybe it's Donald Trump's tariffs. Now it's Brexit, something that happened, many years before Labour even got into power. That's now the new sort of bogeyman that they're pointing towards. I think the public will punish them politically and possibly the local elections in May if they are seen to break what was pretty much the flagship fiscal pledge that they made back last year before they won.
But it does seem a simpler solution, doesn't it, Zoe? Just very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right that this is exhausting for the public, because there absolutely has been speculation that taxes have to go up. You have to pay for this somewhere. People don't want to see any more public spending cuts. And a lot of economists would have said, of course, Brexit was doing harm to our economy. Why has it taken them this long to get that message out? And I think that is going to be the frustration. It's one thing trying to take more money out of people's pay packets, but it's another maintaining you're absolutely not going to do it over and over again and then deciding actually you have to. And I think that is definitely not going to feed into that.
Well, all those reports over the summer that there could be property taxes, people stop buying property, house builders in London are therefore not building. I mean, it all has an impact, doesn't it? The mood music around it and the floating of ideas. So anyway, we'll see. Not long now. We've been talking about it for months. Let's go to the Daily Telegraph then, shall we? And this is the Ministry of Defence with its own black hole. So what's causing that? What's the problem?
Well, this is the story in our paper. The Ministry of Defence, like all government departments, got its settlement in a spending review earlier this year. They know how much money they've got for the next 3 years. Turns out they're already £2 billion over budget, and they're going to have to find some cuts in order to make that money up. It seems that the thing that's driving that actually is the costs imposed on the department from procurement and from spending money on hiring people, contractors, national insurance. I mean, in fact, that appears right at the beginning of the story, the fact that national insurance contributions for employers, which includes government departments, is now having a massive burden on government departments who are trying to pay their staff. So fingers in the MOD perhaps pointing back towards the Treasury and saying, you haven't given us enough money to pay these people, and you're also the reason that we're having to pay them more.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Because, as you say, it's not just the MOD that will be hit by that increase in national insurance employers' contributions.
And again, it just goes to show that the government is not immune from any of these things. The government might make spending pledges. They announced that defence spending would obviously rise, but you still have to find the money to pay for that. And when everything else is getting more expensive, it's really, really hard to account for the cost increase. But I think the public are generally on board with thinking that we do have to spend more on our defence, but where are you going to get that money from? And that is the difficulty. And when it comes to the budget and we talk about balancing the books, which isn't a particularly helpful analogy, but when you talk about money needs to come from somewhere to pay for other things, the public's priorities get very muddled, I think, and trying to make continuous arguments for actually that money needs to go to the MOD. People say, well, I need that money in my pocket.
Yeah. And the MOD buying procurement effectively for Ukraine, which is how it feels at the moment, isn't it? So let's head to Ukraine, really, in the Financial Times. And this is in response to the US sanctions that were announced last night on the two biggest oil companies and what happens now. And the whole point is that Chinese refineries and companies in India are now looking at what they do. And so the headline here, Asia refineries way curbing Russian oil, because they'd then be slapped with secondary sanctions, wouldn't they?
That's right. And this is all, it's not just about what Donald Trump's doing today, but for these countries, it's about what Donald Trump might do tomorrow. And I think he has established with both the US's allies and its enemies that he is willing to act and he's willing to slap them down with these kind of sanctions if necessary. And I think what these countries are thinking is that in the first instance, if they continue to buy Russian oil, their companies might be hit with these secondary sanctions. But in future, if Donald Trump considers that there is still a big problem with China and India especially buying Russian oil, then those countries could also face similar sanctions in future. So this is a bit of a warning shot from Donald Trump, not just to Russia, but to countries that are continuing to prop up the Russian energy industry, saying to them that they need to start curbing the amount that they're buying and try and bring Putin to the table.
Or hiding how they're buying it. We had one guest on earlier who suggested they wouldn't use the US dollar to purchase and wouldn't use EU financial institutions as a way of it not being so trackable. So, you have to see. And we know that Donald Trump is heading to Asia tomorrow evening, actually. I think he's landing actually on Sunday morning. It's such a long journey. And we'll finally meet President Xi of China. of whom he has an interesting conversation to have on tariffs,
Yes.
let alone this secondary sanctions issue.
Yeah, but this is kind of part of Donald Trump's approach. He can do one thing one day that is, it could almost feel like a declaration of war, and then the next day he can be sat in that same room with that person, smiling and patting them on the back and saying, he's a great guy, actually. So it's kind of his shtick. We've seen it, sometimes it looks successful, but then again, the next week it will look like it didn't pay off in the long term. It feels like here, this is definitely Trump's way of trying to put immense pressure on Russia, and we will see. But as Putin has said, this is an attempt to put pressure on Russia, and no self-respecting country ever does anything under pressure. Equally, Putin is also a strong man who doesn't like to feel bullied into things. So who knows whether this will actually finally give that breakthrough.
Yes, and indeed, Putin's response makes the front page, albeit at the bottom of The Guardian. We won't bow to US pressure. That was in response to the US, more damaging even so to the EU, which brought in heavy sanctions, their 19th sanctions package, which will eventually mean that they ban the import of liquid natural gas from Russia, even though pipeline gas and crude oil is not impacted, which is the next bit, obviously. So, you know, Europe now doing it, the US doing it, the UK did it last week. Will it have an impact, do you think? And is he, you know, crying that it won't, and actually it might do?
I don't think this is something that's going to bring Putin to the table immediately. There's no mechanism whereby these sanctions lead to an end in the war in Ukraine. What it does do is forces Putin to make a political choice about how he wants to spend his money. And we know that this war is taking up an enormous proportion of the Russian budget at the moment, and oil is a lot of where that revenue is coming from. So he will continue to face domestic pressure, as he already does, on quality of life in Russia at the moment from Russian people. This kind of policy is the sort of thing that will make Putin choose as to where he needs those savings to come from. And, you know, I think that's how that pressure works, and it could well be successful. And
the other discussion in Europe, of course, is whether to use those frozen Russian assets and whether they should be a loan. Certainly Zelensky suggested that if Russia caused this war, Russia should pay for this war.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a narrative we hear quite a lot. I think in practice it's quite difficult, but you can absolutely see the logic for that. And, you know, it is a way of cutting off the Kremlin's war machine. You know, it is a way of preventing, as Tony said, the revenue from getting there and being able to continue to fund that. So, but it's with all these things, it's difficult to trace in the long term, and it feels like a big move from Europe that we could be moving towards. But again, I think most people are just hoping that it is Trump that can get Putin around the table.
Yes, Trump, as we said, off to Asia, Zelensky to London for another meeting of the coalition of the willing. What are we expecting?
Well, I think we're going to see more of the same. I don't know what the government announcement is. You assume that there will be some more support for Ukraine announced there. Given the issues that the MOD is having, perhaps it won't be a financial one. But I think what we're seeing from our government is an attempt to showcase Britain's diplomatic skills and show that we're at the forefront of that European coalition. I think it's interesting that the EU followed with sanctions today straight away after Donald Trump announced his. And I think what we'll see from Keir Starmer is an attempt to show himself as the leader of Europe and the greatest supporter of Ukraine, even though he doesn't have the kind of financial clout that the EU does in slapping those sanctions on.
Interesting stuff. More coverage of that tomorrow, obviously. Tony, Zoe, stay there if you can. Lots more still to come in the next part of our programme, including the verdict on Soldier F from Bloody Sunday on the front page of the Daily Mail.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. Sky News, the full story first.
I'm Martin Brunt and I'm Sky's crime correspondent.
I'm David Blevins and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Liberation Day.
By popular demand,
Wow.
here we are.
Donald Trump. It is quite the story. Wherever it goes, on Trump 100, we go with it.
Tell us who you're looking for.
Unbelievable!
inevitable we've come to this.
Are you overstating the reach and significance of this deal?
Not like you said it.
From the UK.
Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
It was 10 feet from him, and all of a sudden the shots rang out.
People impacted.
I'll tell you on another day on the podcast what that was all about.
Join us wherever you get your podcasts.
Go ahead, back white jacket.
Deborah Haynes from Sky News. He called you Daddy earlier.
No, he did it very affectionate. Daddy, you're my daddy. Thank you.
Leicester is on its knees.
They've ripped the soul out of my factory and there's nothing left.
It is eerily quiet.
It's constantly on the brink of capacity.
There's overcrowding. It's not a new thing.
It's rough.
There's nothing to hide. Why aren't international journalists allowed in?
Are you worried about escalation?
Of course I'm worried about escalation, which is why my focus is on de-escalation.
The region, I think, is on edge because they are anticipating a retaliation.
Iran retaliates for the US attacks.
Founding principle of the alliance, that an attack on one is an attack on all.
Could Putin attack another NATO country within 5 years?
Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories.
This is insane.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News, get the full story first.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling.
It's not his country, it's ours.
Sky News, the full story first, free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, the Daily Telegraph's associate political editor, Tony Diver, and the political journalist, Zoe Grünewald. Welcome back to both of you. Tony, should we go to the Daily Mail now end the witch hunt? This is after the acquittal of one of the soldiers in the Bloody Sunday killings, as the paper points out, more than 50 years ago. And as supporters pointed out outside the court today, you know, these are older people now, but the division outside that court was palpable, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think this has long been an issue for governments. It was an issue for the Tories for a long time, and it's now become an issue for Keir Starmer. I mean, it is pretty extraordinary that these are people who are being tried for something that happened so many decades ago. And actually, in this case, I think the judge's comments are interesting. He said that the case that the government brought, that the Crown brought, was well short of what was necessary. He seems to be suggesting that the evidence that they had from the beginning was not going to be strong enough, which does raise questions about why the case was brought and how it was brought. But, I mean, the Mail clearly has an angle here, which is to say that these sorts of prosecutions shouldn't continue. And, of course, they weren't going to continue under the previous Tory government, which actually, in law, banned any of these prosecutions from continuing. We're back in this situation because that's in the process of being repealed by Labour. And so this is actually a kind of extraordinary position where, yet again, you have a Prime Minister, former Director of Public Prosecutions, who is having to answer questions about what the CPS, operationally independent CPS, is doing. This comes just after the Chinese spy case, where we were having very similar conversations about what was going on in courtrooms. But I think this is a story that's going to rumble on. I think it's emotive. I think that the public cares about it. A lot of the public will remember some of these events happening. And some of the pictures that we've seen this afternoon of elderly veterans outside the court are pretty extraordinary.
Yes, and the families involved in Bloody Sunday, you know, deeply upset by this. But, you know, the word in the court was, you know, hazy memories of so long ago. And this had been hanging over Soldier F for 25 years, so a quarter of a century, really. Zoe, do you mind if I move on? We've got lots back in, I do apologise. So let's go to the Telegraph now, which is David Lammy claims that detaining the one-in, one-out migrant who's caught trying to come back into Britain shows progress.
Yes, because he said that the fact that the Iranian national who was the first to be deported under the one-in, one-out scheme of France and then returned, but was so quickly identified because of biometric data, because of improvements in the migrant return scheme, because there was more cooperation between the UK and France, is an example of this being successful. I think people will hear this and sort of scratch their heads and say, but doesn't it slightly defy the point of the scheme if people are returning? I think the one-in, one-out scheme was always broader than... the appeal of it, or the idea of it, was always broader than how it sounded. It was about starting up that diplomatic relationship between the UK and France and the UK and Europe, saying that this is a problem, or dealing with immigration is an issue that has to be solved across country. It can't just be the UK on its own trying to do it. You need to share that information. You need to have returns agreements. You need to recreate some of those relationships we had when we were in the EU. And I think that's what David Lammy is getting at here. I just think that's quite a hard sell to the public, because they are going to think that the success of any scheme would be having someone leave the country and not returning.
We're going to do picture stories now, if that's all right with you. I'm just wondering if we've seen the Times yet. We might try and chase that down. But anyway, the Telegraph, the Guardian and the Financial Times are those who've chosen the Sistine Chapel and the visit to Rome, including your paper, Tony, an absolutely exquisite picture, has to be said, on the front page of the Daily Telegraph.
Yeah, it's a fantastic picture, and as Hannah on the right-hand side of the page there points out, this is a healing of a divide, perhaps created at the dissolution of the monasteries. I mean, it's an extraordinary historical moment, and I think that picture there and the colours of the chapel behind them really says it all. I mean, just what an extraordinary event, how incredible it would have been to witness that happening.
Yes, the first time in half a millennium is how we described it tonight, where a British monarch prays with the Pope. But actually, it might be the first time ever, because we simply don't know if it happened before. I mean, they would obviously not have been Church of England before, but even then, has a British monarch gone? Somebody mentioned King Canute might have been possible, but it's not written down, or it's not proven. So it's a really genuinely interesting moment of unity in Christendom, effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take your word for it on that king, but
well, there were two other kings as well. I've forgotten their names, but anyway, yes, potential meets, but
yes. But it is. I mean, it's an extraordinary picture, and I think it says a lot about how King Charles wants to be known. He wants to be known as this king that did bridge divides, that brought different religious faiths together, and even healed those rifts within Christianity itself. He wants to be more of a moderniser, and I think that is evident in this particular event. So yeah, it's very interesting, and I think it is quite symbolic.
And the Guardian has a photograph outside with Pope Leo and the King in deep conversation, and it's the same language. There's no translator to go through, is there? So, in a meeting of minds, presumably on a certain number of issues, the environment, the need to look after people who are poorer in society and so on.
It almost looks like a diplomatic photo, that, doesn't it?
Yes.
It looks like the sort of photo you have when two world leaders meet. And, of course, you can see the Queen there off to the left, but you just wonder what they're in such deep conversation about. And King Charles, fresh from wooing one American in Donald Trump, is now wooing another in the Pope.
Yes, the FT has also got a beautiful picture as the two depart the Sistine Chapel as well. Absolutely resplendent. The other picture story, though, is, of course, Strictly Come Dancing. And you have The Sun, which suggests that potentially the BBC did not know.
Yeah, so there was this announcement by Claudia Winkleman and Tess Daly, sort of on their Instagram, sat next to each other, explaining how they, they've had a blast, but they think it's their time to go. And I think it was a shock to everyone. I don't think there had been really rumours that this was going to happen, but now it turns out that even the BBC, according to The Sun, were blindsided by this. And now people are obviously asking, is there a wider story here? We know that Strictly has had its share of scandals. It had, obviously, the accusations of bullying. There's always been questions about infidelity as well amongst various people. Strictly curse. But absolutely, it's an interesting. It's interesting to see what's going to happen. Yeah.
Run out of time. I apologise. Zoe, Tony, thank you both very much indeed. Thank you. More at the top of the hour.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle. treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.